Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something truly fascinating, the mechanics of Mothership OS. This is a deterministic cybernetic system built from the ground up to tackle deep structural poverty. And we're not just talking about tweaking a few financial policies here. We are fundamentally rewriting how governance and technology interact with the most vulnerable parts of an economy. So, let's jump right in.
I want you to ask yourself a pretty stark question. How do you govern an economy that cannot see its own people? Think about it. That is the fundamental tension we're exploring today. When a central system has massive blind spots, like it literally can't verify who is working, what they're producing, or where they even are, how can it possibly protect them or lift them up? Well, the short answer is, it can't.
Sabah, Malaysia, is a perfect illustration of this exact paradox. Now, on the surface, you see visible resource wealth. We're talking booming tourism, a rich, gorgeous natural environment. But here's the thing. That beautiful exterior masks some really deep structural constraints. There's a hidden reality here, a severe poverty paradox. The region experiences highly uneven integration into national modernization. What that means on the ground is that vast rural communities and informal workers are just physically and economically marginalized. They're completely cut off from the benefits of all that visible wealth.
To put that into perspective, look at the data. Only 17.8% of employed persons in Sabah have attained a tertiary education. 17.8%. When you compare that to 38.2% in peninsular Malaysia, that gap is just massive. It's not just a number, it represents a profound loss in opportunity and skill acquisition that severely limits the whole region's development.
Researchers actually call this a human capital execution void. And it's absolutely crucial to understand that this isn't just your standard policy failure. It is a severe void that completely chokes off industrial growth. We're looking at a serious lack of specialized higher education in critical fields like AI and data science. On top of that, there's a continuous brain drain as talent just leaves for West Malaysia and Singapore. So the local economy ends up relying heavily on manual and sometimes stateless labor in rural sectors like agriculture. And all of this, it's compounded by really weak institutional coordination.
So this leads us directly to a massive disconnect. Formal institutional reality versus informal ground reality. It's like two different universes. On one side, you have the rigid, highly structured, audit-ready expectations of global institutions, banks, Wall Street, the whole shebang. On the other side, you have the messy, analog, entirely undocumented reality of rural micro-merchants, farmers, and fishers. These two worlds are speaking completely different languages, which makes it virtually impossible for the informal worker to access formal capital.
Section 1. The L4 Delivery Shell.
Enter STNA, which is pronounced STAK. This is the mobile-first interaction surface that takes all that messy, informal reality we just talked about and converts it into a highly structured, audited digital state. It operates at the absolute front line, right in the hands of the people who need it the most. Now, just to keep things conversational from here on out, I'm strictly going to refer to it as the app.
This brings us to a really revolutionary concept, multinational parity for the sole proprietor. What does that actually mean? Well, because of the heavy-duty governance framework backing it, the app brings the exact same structural governance, audit tracking, and institutional reliability to a single rural farmer that a massive multinational enterprise would get. So a single human operating a tiny business is suddenly wrapped in this highly protected, globally recognized corporate architecture. It's a real game changer. The secret sauce here is how it's structured. The app completely throws out those traditional, abstract home tabs you see everywhere else. Instead, it guides the user through 4 governed product rails. First, you have Finance, which handles structured ledgers and receipt ingestion. Then Marketplace, for storefront management and listing states. Next up is Upgrade, which acts as this enablement corridor to secure fair capital access. And finally, Support, for operational help and network status. Every single action a user takes is routed safely through these distinct paths.
Section 2. Babel Ingestion Pipeline. Okay, the brilliant part of this pipeline is that it operates on a zero-literacy assumption. It is an audio-first system. A user doesn't need to sit there and type out complex forms. They can just use voice or photo intake and speak naturally, even in local dialects like Cadiz and Dusun. The system takes that, runs a multi-dialect translate, verifies constraints to make sure it actually understands the intent, and then files it to a queue. It literally meets the user exactly where they are, completely eliminating the technology barrier through a simple snap and file process.
But, and this is absolutely critical, this AI assistance is bound by a non-negotiable rule: null over invention. If an operational claim lacks verified evidence, or if the AI is even a little bit unsure, the op returns a null result rather than fabricating data. It'll just stop and explicitly ask the human for clarification. It absolutely refuses to hallucinate facts, ensuring the data remains completely pure. The machine is an advisor for sure, but execution requires deliberate human approval.
Section 3. Worm ledger and state.
So what happens to that data? It goes into a worm ledger. That stands for write once, read many, and it's an immutable data architecture. Basically, the app takes those informal analog inputs, the spoken memos, the photos of handwritten receipts, and permanently locks them into an audit-ready digital state. Once it's written in there, it cannot be altered, spoofed, or erased, period.
And how does it lock it down? Through something called a triple anchor process. For every single event, the system anchors identity via a key management system that verifies exactly who is acting. It anchors space using a hardware GPS to validate where the action occurs. And it anchors time using atomic network protocols to lock exactly when it happens. Only after all that is the event committed to the sovereign vault. This is what makes every single transaction Wall Street ready and legally undeniable.
It all boils down to one powerful concept: accountability. The app enforces this accountability through a really strict before, execute, after protocol, or BEA. You prove you have the right to do something before you do it, you execute it securely, and you log it immutably right after. It leaves absolutely zero room for shadow operations.
Section 4. The Jubilee Rail.
Now, if you have a system that is perfectly tracking all this economic data, you absolutely need an ultimate economic guardian built in to protect users from exploitation. And that is exactly what the Jubilee Rail is. It's an L3 governed capability whose primary function is to block exponential debt trap dynamics. It can systematically classify the severity and legitimacy of a financial burden. It evaluates whether a struggling entity should be preserved rather than just driven to terminal failure. And, if necessary, it steps in to execute governed release logic and productive restoration. It is literally a hard-coded block against debt enslavement.
Consider this stark contrast: extractive capital versus restorative governance. You know, the traditional extractive model often just strips a struggling entity of its assets until total failure. It treats people as nothing more than instruments for yield. But the Jubilee Rail? That represents restorative governance. It's a mandate to preserve long-run human capital. It steps right in to interrupt that collapse and restore the productive capacity of the community.
Now, if this sounds abstract, it's actually deeply grounded in reality. This quote by industrialist Robert Bosch really hits the nail on the head. "I would rather lose money than trust. The integrity of my promises are more important to me than momentary profit." That's not just some nice PR slogan. That is the literal core governance stance of this operating system. Integrity, durability, and human trust mechanically take precedence over short-term yield. I want to deliver this punchline as plainly as possible. People are not disposable instruments. The entire architecture we've explored today, from the audio intake to the immutable ledgers, all the way to the Jubilee Rail, it ensures that commerce is completely bounded by justice, concrete evidence, and the genuine capacity for restoration.
Which leaves us with this final provocative question to wrap up our explainer. If our technology can perfectly audit reality, shouldn't its ultimate purpose be to protect the human capacity that creates it? It completely flips the script on how we view the intersection of capital, technology, and human dignity, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep exploring these big ideas, and I'll see you next time.